Imagine, if you will, the uncanny case of a ruler who finds out he doesn't actually rule. This man is fairly chosen to be president and he's appointed to the most powerful role, but he finds out that as president, his orders aren't actually obeyed. His subordinates don't really listen to him, and the true power actually lies elsewhere. Now, this strange sounding tale, it's not something from another dimension. It's from ours. And when I tell you about a president who isn't actually holding any power, you know exactly who I mean. Your mind went straight to Lord Herbert Morrison, the 6th President of the British Board of Film Censorship, before it was renamed the British Board of Film Classification in 1984. Obviously. I know. Recently, I've been revising my material on BBFC history. I want to redo the lectures because I think I can do it better now. I've got a lot more research material, thanks to you guys. And I came across something that I thought I actually just have to make a video on right now. It is too interesting, and I think it's actually got quite general appeal. Now, this is part of BBFC history, but it's really relevant to wider political theory, specifically elite theory. Now, you may not have heard of elite theory. If you want to understand it, I recommend this book, The Populist, Delusion, which is co-authored by Sheila Lambrini and a younger, slightly buffer David Aronovich. And it goes over elite theory concepts and scholars, key thinkers in the area. The short version of it is that elite theory is the study of how power operates in reality. It's a value-free analysis of power operating in the real world, in contrast to how power is supposed to operate, to narratives about power. And we come across a really keen example of that here in the case of President Herbert Morrison. So who is Lord Herbert Morrison? He's born in 1888, same year as Carl Schmitt, incidentally, highly relevant for elite theory. And in 1960, after serving as Deputy Prime Minister in the Labour government, he's appointed a 5-year term as President of the BBFC, and he's working alongside John Trevelyan. John Trevelyan comes from a very different background to him, much more upper class, you might even say. And he's a career bureaucrat. He's a guy who's a canny operator. He knows how the system works. He has got this really different background and really different approach to Lord Morrison. Because Lord Morrison comes from a working class background. He's a son of a policeman, and he's fiercely proud of this. He's very suspicious of career bureaucrats. He's very suspicious of universities. Kudos to him there. And he's very practical. He's very no-nonsense. He's also a lot more in tune with sort of the general public attitude. And so when he sees films that are flagrantly pushing the boundaries, going over the line, breaching the rules, he wants to bring out the banhammer. He is, of course, president of the British Board of Film Censorship. He's okay with censoring films. John Trevelyan, on the other hand, actually really is uncomfortable censoring films. He doesn't want to do it. He tries to avoid it if he can. They have a clash of approach. They have a clash of worldview. So how does the secretary end up overruling the president? Well, it happens before Lord Morrison even arrives. While there is no precedent in place, John Trevelyan goes to the board of the BBFC and starts arranging for a memo to be written, a memo that clearly delineates the roles of the president and the secretary. Previously, they had a kind of mucky, fuzzy dual control, and John Trevelyan wanted the differences clearly laid out to avoid difficulties. And what he got was a situation where the president is in charge of policy and the secretary of the board, his role is in charge of executing that policy. It's an executive function. The way he describes it in his memoir, in this book, in his book, What the Censor Saw, is like a captain who gives the destination and the navigator who decides how one reaches the destination. Now that sounds a little dry. Why do I bring it up? Why do I risk you clicking off? Because how it plays out in practice is really important. Really early on, Lord Morrison and Trevelyan are encountering a film which they didn't like, they thought it wasn't worthy, and Morrison wants to ban it. Just straight up, breaks the rules, ban it. Trevelyan suggests that they write to the film studio with a long list of cuts, a punishingly long list of cuts, that if it were enacted, would make the film unsaleable to cinemas. That kind of really illustrates a difference in their thinking. But it's not enough for Morrison, and he pushes the matter. He says, let's just ban it. But Trevelyan points to that memo that clearly distinguishes their remits, and he says, no, look, you set the policy and I execute it. I've got the choice in how we go about making sure the policy is followed, and I want to do this course. So right from the off, you see that the president, nominally in control, actually loses a huge amount of control, because it's a lot harder for him to say that John Trevelyan isn't actually affecting the policy, when there is obviously a wide range of approaches that you could take. It's that kind of very canny operating that instantly costs Lord Morrison a whole load of power as president. Now, there is a far more egregious example, kind of an outrageous example actually, that was really the motivator for me to make this whole video. And it involves, of all things, West Side Story. I know this is really weird to say in an era of cuties, of Short Bus, of Human Centipede Part 2, but West Side Story caused quite a lot of trouble in the film censorship business, and it was at risk of being banned. Really. So West Side Story is coming out when there had been a lot of concern over films about gangs and gang violence, hoodlums, especially juveniles involved in gangs. And so even West Side Story was raising concern because of that aspect. Now Morrison saw the gang fights and he thought, it's not okay, the film should not be released. Trevelyan really liked the film and really took opposition. And his way of defeating Morrison on this, I'm just going to read to you directly from his book because it's quite astounding. This is on page 72 of his memoirs written in 1973, What the Censor Saw. I remember one particularly difficult decision when, on seeing the film of West Side Story, to my surprise and dismay, Lord Morrison said that he would not pass the scenes of gang fights. I pointed out that they were shot as a modern ballet with choreography by Jerome Robbins, but he was not impressed. It's kind of a niche appeal to make, in fairness. Nor was he impressed when I mentioned that the story had been written by William Shakespeare. On this occasion, I found a compromise by writing a letter to the distributor mentioning the board's concerns about some of these scenes and asking him to consider the possibility of reductions, although appreciating that there would be problems with the music. The audio and the visual are printed on the same film at the time, so when you edit, it's very difficult to separate them and can cause really obvious signs of a cut, which is why they're hesitant to do it. Just to explain that. In confidence, I told the distributor the reason for my letter and took him the draft of a letter for him to send to me, saying that, while he appreciated the board's concern, to cut these scenes would be very difficult, if not impossible. Just kind of amazing, really, isn't it? And asking the board to agree to the film opening in the West End in its full form, but undertaking that the company would do something if there should be strong criticism. If you think there might be some wiggle room around the term strong criticism, has a criticism been strong enough? I think you're starting to get elite theory. His letter, Trevelyan's letter, satisfied Lord Morrison, at least to the point of his agreeing to pass the film. I might add that his wife, who saw the film with us, told him he was making a fuss about nothing, but this did not influence him. Why would he listen to his wife? Anyway, side matter. So Trevelyan wins out. I thought that was just quite amazing. Now, do you think that act of writing a letter to be sent by someone you're meant to be negotiating with to persuade you, do you think that act of effectively writing for your supposed opposition, do you think that is covered by the remit note that we talked about earlier? I'm not sure it was, but the remit note is there to be pulled out when it's convenient and ignored when it's not, because power operates very differently in reality to how it is meant to operate. That is the core of elite theory, or one of them anyway. Now, they have more issues like this, and of course Trevelyan is coming out on top in most of them according to his memoirs, but nevertheless Trevelyan has decided after this that Lord Morrison is a bit difficult to work with, and it's probably better if they have a different president. And so when Lord Morrison is called away on a delegation to the West Indies, Trevelyan calls a special meeting of the British Board of Film Censorship and influences everyone there to agree that Lord Morrison's presidency should not be renewed when the 5-year contract is up, which was going to happen very imminently. He's not even there to represent himself, you know. It's interesting timing, it's canny. Now Morrison comes back. He's not happy about this. He said he was going to fight it, but it doesn't really come to anything because Lord Morrison was already in his 70s when he was appointed in 1960, and he died about 4 months after this incident in March 1965 at the age of 77. The way John Trevelyan talks about Lord Morrison after his passing is very respectful, and it's actually quite endearing, and so I think I want to kind of balance this out a bit. I've spoken as Trevelyan in a way that makes him seem extremely Machiavellian, which he is. But he has good reason to be. One of the main stakeholders for him as secretary of the BBFC is the film industry itself. And the British film industry has always been very fragile. A lot of jobs, a lot of money relies on these films actually being able to go into cinemas and make some money. And so they do have to get a film certificate and be passed. And so John Trevelyan had a motivation to make compromise rather than be extremely strict. So you can understand where he's coming from. Now, if I were to critique that position, I would say it's kind of short-term thinking, because you compromise on this and then you compromise on that. And his book is actually full of that. He is fully aware of him giving ground constantly, making exceptions, and he's also fully aware of studios just bending the rules and submitting stuff under dishonest guises to get material that otherwise would not be allowed through. So he does know what's going on, really. You could say that a more long-term approach, a long-term view, would be to put the rules extremely clearly as they were in Thomas Power O'Connor's day, and enforce those rules very clearly, fairly and strictly. And then for a short period, yes, there would be arguments, there would be some problems, but studios would know very clearly that the rules are there and they will be followed, and they would stop submitting material that goes out of the way to bend the rules and break the rules. And they would be more compliant, or at least submit films that could be more easily edited if they were found to be in breach of the rules. That would be the more long-term view of things. But that is slightly beside the point. And John Trevelyan spent his sort of 20 years as secretary of the BBFC really just sort of sliding his way down the slippery slope there. So my sympathy is there, but it is somewhat limited by understanding reality. Now that is going slightly off the point. This was a video about how Lord Morrison, even though he was president, found himself outmaneuvered and unable to actually wield any of the power that he nominally held. And case in point for this, in the actual history of the BBFC, in their own book, Lord Morrison is mentioned precisely once, in passing. That's the only reference made to him. Well, that is pretty much everything. I just wanted to cover this interesting case of elite theory in action because it just really stood out to me. with everything else I'm reading that's not entirely horror cinema related, seeing the political theory actually take place in the British Board of Film Classification was too good an opportunity. I had to cover it. So I hope you found that interesting. If you want to see more of me, the next thing I'm doing is inevitably going to be a stream. I'm going to have details of that stream down in the description below. And if you want to support what I'm doing, there are details for how you can join as a member or support me on Subscribestar. All of those are welcome. But I will leave it there. Thank you for watching. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.
Show.
No hate watching. Don't do it.